channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning and welcome to The Briefing, live from Wakefield this morning. It's 9:30 and my name's Tom Harwood. Today we'll be exploring voices from Wakefield in a crucial by-election that is to take place tomorrow. We'll also be speaking to the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab and the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express. All that after the headlines.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, rising food prices have pushed inflation to its highest level in 40 years, rising now to 9.1% in May. That's up from 9% in April. It's the cost of food and non-alcoholic goods. They were the main driver, seeing the biggest jump since 2009. That's, of course, put more pressure on household budgets. The Chancellor says the government is using all the tools at its disposal to bring inflation down and to try to combat rising prices. Last week, the Bank of England warned inflation was likely to peak at more than 11% in October. Now, the government's proposing new legislation which will give the UK powers to override rulings by the European Court of Human Rights. It's after the court blocked the first deportation flight carrying asylum seekers to Rwanda last week. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, who's introducing the Bill of Rights to Parliament later today, says the reforms will restore common sense to the system. We're hoping to speak to Dominic Raab on GB News very shortly. Now, 280 people have been killed and hundreds more injured following an earthquake in eastern Afghanistan. It was a 6.1 magnitude quake that struck early this morning around 27 miles from the border with Pakistan. Houses were reduced to rubble. Residents were describing strong jolts. Authorities have launched rescue operations and say the death toll is likely to rise as they reach remote villages. Back here in the UK, passengers have been hit by more train cancellations as talks today resume to resolve a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Only 60% of trains are running today, with some operators ending services earlier than usual ahead of another round of strike action tomorrow. A third walkout will be staged on Saturday. The RMT union is meeting National Rail and other train companies in a bid to end the stalemate. The Shadow Culture Secretary, Lucy Powell, says the government isn't doing enough to help solve the problem.
This huge backlog Britain now, and that's what the government should be focusing fully on, dealing with these issues, dealing with the cost of living crisis, instead of creating these false divisions and these false wars, and almost looking like they're gleefully willing along this sort of strike action and strife that we're seeing, because they think that will help them going into the next general election. And it's a party political campaign of theirs instead of putting the national interest first.
Glastonbury has officially opened after a 3-year hiatus because of the pandemic. Traffic is building up around the site in Somerset as thousands of festival goers opt to avoid train journeys. Well, the event's celebrating its 50th anniversary with acts including Ukraine's Eurovision Song Contest winners Kalish Orchestra. On Saturday, Sir Paul McCartney will also become the oldest ever solo artist to headline the festival at 80 years old. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. I'll keep you up to date across the day. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning and welcome to the briefing. The time is 9:34 and you're with the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, live here from Wakefield this morning. Well, today, before we get into the by-election antics, I'm delighted to say we can be joined by the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab. Thanks for joining us, Dominic. I suppose, first of all, we've got some pretty seismic legislation appearing before Parliament today. It's been a very long time coming. It's been in multiple Conservative manifestos. And I suppose my first question to you, Deputy Prime Minister, will be why is it that the day before two pretty crucial by-elections do we finally get to see details of the British Bill of Rights?
Well, actually, I published a consultation document with the policy outline and indeed texts on clauses in December, so it's not the first time. But we said at the time we'd move to a consultation, I think that's the right thing to do, and then publish the bill around now to allow second reading, as it's called, the first big debate in Parliament before the end of July and the summer recess. And what this bill will do is it will replace the Human Rights Act, reinforce our quintessentially British liberties like freedom of speech, the liberty that guards the others, give it higher pecking order in the hierarchy of rights, greater weight attached to it. I think that's important. But also curb some of the abuses of human rights that we've seen with very elastic interpretations fueled by the Human Rights Act, which, just to give you an illustration, have allowed foreign criminals to trump deportation orders with very opaque, elastic interpretations of things like the right to family life. And that's the kind of common sense approach that we'll restore to our justice system.
Now, you first proposed a British Bill of Rights all the way back in 2009, well over a decade ago. The Conservatives have been in power in one form or another now for 12 years. Why has it taken this long?
Well, I wrote a book about it in 2009. You're right, it was a manifesto commitment in the 2010 election. And when I was Justice Minister in 2015, we prepared a consultation on it, but it was interrupted by Brexit. Now that Brexit is delivered and we've dealt with that issue, I think it's right that we restore some common sense to our human rights regime. And so we're staying in the European Convention. I think that's the right thing to do. I don't think we need to leave it, and indeed leaving it wouldn't really solve many more of our problems. But we will stay within the Convention, overhaul the Human Rights Act, and that gives us much greater leeway, margin of appreciation over the application of rights. And in particular, there are areas where we want to strengthen liberty, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. But there are also areas where we want to be able to protect the public. My parole reforms, dealing with the threat of ideologues and terrorists inside prison. And of course, as I've already said, deportation of foreign national offenders. So we'll get the balance right, protect our proud tradition of liberty, but also restore some common sense.
Frankly, would this reform have meant that Rwanda flight that was grounded, not just by the European Court of Human Rights, of course, but by British courts as well, would this reform mean that that flight may have been able to take off?
I'm always careful to talk about individual cases, particularly when they're subject to ongoing litigation, but let me address it very squarely. The idea that after consideration in 3 UK courts, a so-called interim 39 order could be handed down from Strasbourg, effectively an injunction to stop the flights going, when the UK courts have said they're OK, as they did in the most recent case. That is something which our Bill of Rights will squarely address and make it clear that those orders have no effect in the UK courts.
Now, moving on to another issue this morning. Of course, we've got those new inflation numbers, 9.1%. Pretty excoriating numbers there, inching towards double-digit inflation. And I'm just wondering, I'm looking across at all of the parties in the United Kingdom, really. I'm not seeing a single plan to deal with the causes of inflation. You've announced multiple packages to deal with the consequences of inflation, handing out more money to people. What are your policies in order to deal with the causes of inflation?
I think there's some big, the causes of this inflation, it's global. You look at the US, Belgium, the Netherlands, similar levels of inflation. I think we need to address some of those causes. So, for example, stronger energy self-reliance. So the work we're doing on new nuclear and the renewable technologies will over time do that, strengthen that. I think we're talking in the context of our food strategy and farming, about making sure that we're less reliant on imports. I think it's broadly 50% UK food production comes from the UK, 30% from continental Europe, 20% from the rest of the world. We want to strengthen our diversification and our self-reliance. So those are some of the structural challenges. In relation to wider inflation, of course, the thing we've got to do now is not make the problem worse. So we know that inflation will come back next year, come back down, and what we just need is some wage restraint across the board to prevent a vicious cycle, which of course, if we gave in to the unions, would only hurt the very poorest, the most vulnerable and the lowest paid workers in our society, which is why it's important to take a firm line in relation to the industrial action that we've seen from the RMT union.
So is the government now agreeing with the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, who said not so long ago that people shouldn't ask for pay rises this year or big pay rises this year? At the time, the government said that that was the wrong thing for him to say. Do you now agree with him?
Well, look, we want and we're focused on a high-wage economy, but the thing that will undermine the value of people's pay packet, the one that they actually receive, is if we don't get a grip on inflation over the next 12 months. And that's the thing that we're focused on in the here and now. And of course, it's, as I said, a global challenge because of the aftershocks of the pandemic, but also the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think in relation to, for example, the RMT dispute, there's a world of difference between a 3% increase and a 7% increase. And what we've got to do is just get that balance right. We understand the challenge that low-paid workers have got making ends meet, which is why we've got the universal credit, the national living wage, boosting their pay packets in a responsible way. But if we see wage inflation go up across the board, then inflation will stay higher for longer, and that will only undermine and undercut the wages and the pay of the lowest paid in our society.
Just in our final 30 seconds, Deputy Prime Minister, of course inflation is high in the US, it's high in the UK, it's high in the EU. But in a country like Japan, it's just 2.5%. Now, Japan didn't pursue the same sort of incredibly loose monetary policy that the UK, the US and the EU have been pursuing in recent years. They didn't go for big quantitative easing. I wonder, do we need a stricter mandate for the Bank of England? Do we need tighter monetary policy?
Yeah, of course, Japan has suffered stagflation for many years. We, of course, learn from all of our Asian allies, and that part of the world is critically important. But I'm not sure that the Japanese model, if you look at recent years, last 10 years, is one that we would want to adopt wholesale. In relation to Bank of England mandates, it's independent, and that really is a matter for the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time this morning on GB News. We really appreciate it. Well, moving on now, I'm standing here today in Wakefield, and this week we've been exploring what the candidates and indeed voters of this particular constituency have to say when they go to vote tomorrow. Welcome to Wakefield. This town that had been held by the Labour Party for decades was won by the Conservatives in 2019, a definitive seat in the Red Wall. The Tory candidate was Imran Ahmed Khan. He won by just over 3,000 votes. But just a couple of months ago, he resigned in disgrace, having been convicted for sexually assaulting a a 15-year-old boy. Now, this by-election is being held on Thursday, and the locals here will have the choice of a smorgasbord of candidates. They've been bombarded with literature over the last few weeks, and this Thursday it finally comes to an end. Many people are saying this is ultimately, despite the huge range of candidates, a two-horse race between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. But what do local people think? Will the Conservatives be able to hold on? Or could the Labour Party, insurgent as the polls suggest they are, take the seat back? I've been speaking to some of the big players in this by-election today. First up, it was the Tory candidate, Nadeem Ahmed. The former Conservative MP for this seat sort of hangs heavy over this race. What's your message to the people of Wakefield in this by-election?
The message I'm going is my own character. I'm 16 years, a local councillor here, non-stop, so I've been here. I am from the area, I've grown up here. I know many people and hopefully meeting many more people. I'm standing on my own credibility and my own character as an educator for 20 years within secondary education, and I know that I've got a clean character. I understand that people are unhappy and will be unhappy with the last MP, and he is in the right place for what he's done, and I cannot in any way defend any of those actions. But I do stand on my own character, and I believe that I'm reaching out to the voters there and just letting them know that not all politicians are the same, and they can gain that trust again in politics in general, and they've got someone that from their area will listen to their needs and be responsive.
So there have been two opinion polls that have been publicly available, and they both have the Labour Party ahead of the Conservatives. In 2019, the seat was won by the Conservatives for the first time in many, many decades of it being held by Labour hands. How confident are you feeling in this race?
I do feel confident because the seat actually has been marginal for a long time. It's been a marginal seat. It's never really been. The last previous MP, Mary Cray, let down the people. She was a Remainer, an ardent Remainer, and told the people that she didn't know what they voted for. That still resonates with people now. My father's generation voted Labour. They used to vote Labour blindly, almost. They admitted that, but their children are not Labour voters. They are no longer Labour voters, and they've had enough of being told what to do.
Have you felt supported by the Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister was unable to come on Friday. He fully planned to be here. He called me, I think it was Saturday or Sunday morning, and explained the circumstances, which I fully understand. As we know, the Ukraine crisis is on our border and doorstep. And if Ukraine was to fail, there's devastating consequences for all of us.
That's really interesting. Keir Starmer has obviously visited this seat for the Labour Party. What's been the reaction to him here?
I'm thankful that Keir Starmer's come to Wakefield, because every time he comes here, he probably gains us extra votes.
I also caught up with the leader of the Lib Dem group on the local council, Tom Gordon. What is the Lib Dem message in this by-election?
You know, we've seen Wakefield be represented by both a Labour MP and more recently a Conservative MP, and it's clear that there are people out there who are looking for an alternative from the two main parties.
Has the leader of your party visited?
We had a visit from Daisy Cooper, the deputy leader of Liberal Democrats, and you know, we've seen the sort of same favours and people from across the UK come through to help out.
So just finally in this conversation, what would be a good result for the Liberal Democrats here on Thursday? What is your aim?
I think our aim really is to make sure that within Wakefield that we are seen as a credible, serious party that is, you know, capable of competing.
Now, we had hoped to speak to the Labour candidate here, Simon Lightwood. I'm standing outside his campaign headquarters here, adorned with union flags and Labour posters. Sadly, though, we're told by the local Labour Party here that Simon has COVID. They won't tell us exactly when he contracted the disease, but it means that he can't speak to us in person or even via Zoom. We asked if anyone else from the Labour Party would like to speak to us, and they did see if anyone might be available, a local councillor perhaps, but sadly none were available either. But the Labour Party did give us an off-the-record briefing, saying they're running a positive campaign here, saying that the result is expected, in their eyes, to be close. Let's have a look at some of their literature. Well, the residents of Wakefield have been bombarded by literature from all of the parties that are standing, so many different ones of them. We've got a selection of Labour and Conservative literature here, and it's interesting looking at what the parties are saying, at least in their biggest pieces, where the Conservative Party are saying that the Labour Party candidate is not local, that he lives in a different part of town, whereas the Tory candidate is local. The Labour Party, however, are saying that Simon Lightwood is local, saying he moved to study to Wakefield. He stayed, met his partner and bought his first home here. So there's a bit of a battle there in terms of who the local party is. Interestingly, the Labour Party have brought back these. They're called pledge cards. Now, they haven't been used in any Labour campaign in by-elections in recent history, so the local parties say, but famously, Tony Blair used these sort of pledge cards in the 1997 general election. Interesting tactics from Sir Keir Starmer. They have on them these pledges, and they're mostly about local issues, about fighting to save the local walk-in health centre, although the Tories say that is already being saved. It's about bringing back bus routes and delivering investment and well-paid jobs in Wakefield. A very clear local focus to this campaign literature. The Labour Party also have those key points there, and clearly the message that it's a two-horse race. And of course, Simon Lightwood front and centre there. It's interesting, on his literature, there's Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, there's Louise Hay. There's lots of figures in the Labour Party, but no Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer is not featuring on this leaflet at all. Now, the Labour Party tell us that they're running a positive campaign, and the leaflets that they've provided here do seem pretty positive, but they're not the only leaflets that have been sent by the party. This leaflet appeared at the start of the campaign, attacking the Conservative Party, of course, for their previous candidate, Imran Ahmed Khan, a convicted sex offender, and asking the question, who will the Tories choose next? But enough of the politicians. Here's what the local people of Wakefield have to say about their votes.
The media and the bubble, as they're called down in London, think that us northerners don't really know what we're talking about. We're not as educated, we've not been to the universities or whatever that they have, but we're not daft. We know what's going on in the world, and we're not going to be had over by these people. And I just hope that a lot of similar people to me, and I'm born in Wakefield, brought up in Wakefield. My dad was a coal miner. I'm from 3 generations of mining people, and really I should be a socialist, but I aren't.
Don't get rid of Boris. I love Boris. I'm sorry, I do.
Did you say that?
Well, they just had a party which was out of order. They've both done it. They've all done it. More than one party.
Well, I'm sorry. I have a brother who had lost his wife in lockdown. I've got 2 brothers that lost their wives in lockdown, and one of them particularly had his couple of daughters in his garden and his grandson, because it was his grandson's birthday, and the police called and he got fined. And he was literally had just lost his wife. So that's how But at the end of the day, the government set the rules. And if they can't abide by their own rules, why should anybody else?
I've been quite around town. I've seen nothing about any candidates or anything like that. Am I supposed to say anything about candidates? I've literally not, no.
I just think Labour went off the boil in this area and they weren't really bothered. And I liked a lot of Conservative ideas.
So you voted Conservative in 2019?
I did.
But now you might not?
Now I might not, no.
So lots of apathy, really, at this by-election. The turnout is not expected to be particularly high. Of course, there are 15 candidates standing on Thursday, and their names are as follows. Sir Archibald Eaton, Monster Raving Loony Party. Nadeem Ahmed, Conservative. Akef Akbar, Independent. Paul Bickerdike, Christian People's Alliance. Mick Dodgson, Freedom Alliance. Jada Franson, Independent. Jordan Gaskell, UKIP. David Hurdson, Yorkshire Party. Therese Hurst, English Democrats. Christopher Jones, Northern Independence Party. Simon Lightwood, Labour Party, Jamie Needle, Liberal Democrats, Ash Routh, Green Party, Ashley Simon, Britain First, Chris Walsh, Reform UK. Reporting from the Wakefield constituency, I've been Tom Harwood for GB News. Now, of course, it's not just Wakefield voting tomorrow, but also Tiverton and Honiton down in the southwest. I'm sure GB News will be covering that in greater detail throughout the rest of the day. But now let's turn to Westminster, because, of course, Prime Minister's Questions is taking place at midday today. And I'm delighted to say that the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, can join us now to talk it through. Sam, what do you think Keir Starmer will be going on today?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Keir Starmer has ignored the big issues of the day in the last two Prime Minister's Question sessions. So who would really know? I think, obviously, the train strike today, the rail strike over this week, has been a big issue for the country, but it's a tricky issue for Keir Starmer, so he might want to avoid that. Obviously, we've got rising inflation, there's figures out this morning, and so I suspect he might go on that, the cost of living crisis.
It's interesting to see that Sir Keir Starmer has avoided what the media has termed as some of these more wedge issues, whether it be strikes, whether it be Rwanda and asylum, and indeed those policies that the Conservative Party have been pushing more. Sir Keir Starmer trying to sort of make headway on this issue of the economy. I suppose the problem for him there is that Labour haven't really come out with much policy with regard to how they'll deal with inflation.
Yeah, and I think, look, this is Prime Minister's Questions. It's supposed to be about the Prime Minister, but I think it's all about Sir Keir Starmer today. How will he respond to these big issues? He hasn't come forward with any concrete plans on strikes, the cost of living, that kind of thing. So although it is about Boris Johnson, it clearly, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen him dodge the big issues. And last week he had quite a strange Prime Minister's Questions where he was trying to show that he's more fun side after accusations he was boring. The week before that, he failed to go for the jugular when the Prime Minister was under real trouble about his own leadership after the leadership election. And so it's quite strange. We don't really know how he's going to respond today. Is he going to be the fun Keir Starmer? Will it be the boring Keir Starmer? Is he going to come left field with something else? We'll have to see.
It's interesting looking at public attitude to the strikes. We've seen some polling in the last day or so, which shows that potentially these strikes aren't as unpopular as the government might have thought, or at least potentially the public in the round doesn't blame the unions for these strikes as much as many people might have thought. Might this change the conversation?
Yeah, the polling's mixed, so I think it's quite difficult to say. You see different results from different polls. So I think what's really changed since perhaps the 70s and 80s when strikes were happening on a large scale then is that obviously the development of working from home. And that means that fewer people have been affected this time round. Although I have to tell you, Tom, I've had trouble getting here this morning because of the strikes, and there were certainly a lot of people affected today and very, very unhappy. And this is, you know, it really is a case of, are you directly affected by this? And I think that really sways personal opinion on this.
Now, just in our last 30 seconds, 2 by-elections tomorrow. Is the Prime Minister going to lose them both?
Well, your report from Wakefield I thought was interesting, and I was up in Doncaster at the weekend after the Conservatives had their conference up there, the Northern Conservatives. And actually, I think it's quite mixed. It's not as simple as some people seem to make out. I don't think the Red Wall has lost faith in the Prime Minister en masse. That's certainly not what I was hearing. But I think it might be a case that actually people are more apathetic, as you were hearing. People are more likely to stay at home. So I think this Prime Minister's question is quite an important one for both Keir Starmer and for Boris Johnson, because it's what happens today in the chamber will be what leads the news bulletins tonight, and those wavering voters, those ones who are thinking that they might actually just stay at home, they're the ones that they want to persuade today with their performance at the dispatch box.
Certainly the watchword, I suppose, is tomorrow will be turn out, turn out, turn out. But for now, Sam Lister, thanks so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. It's been really, really interesting. That's it for the programme today. Up next is To The Point, coming after these messages.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.